Out of Order by Dee Ernst. Part 2. The next morning, the elevator was out of order. I'd found the folded piece of paper that had been slipped under the front door sometime in the early hours, and had been informed, via typed notification, that the elevator would be down for the next 12 hours for an unexpected repair. If there were any problems, I should call Seth. 3 flights of stairs might be a problem for some people, but I wasn't about to be one of them. I needed the exercise, so I was quite prepared to put in a little extra legwork. I hadn't counted on Monty, who walked obediently to the stairwell, looked down at the first step, whined, sat down, and refused to budge. I tugged on his leash. "Come on, Monty, walk, remember?" He scooched back a little on his haunches, away from the steps. "Monty, let's go." He whined again and got up, turned around, and pulled me toward the elevator, which had this big red and white out of order sign on it. I pointed. "Monty, we need to use the stairs. Come on." Obviously, he couldn't read, or he just chose to ignore the sign. I raised my voice. "Monty, walk now." He looked at me with those big brown eyes and sighed. Mr. Fishbein, who owned the other penthouse next to Aunt Polly, came out of his doorway carrying Harry, his dachshund. "Monty doesn't do stairs," he said as he went past. "What do you mean?" I called after him. He turned and shrugged. "Polly has a terrible time with him. It's a phobia or something. He won't go up or down the stairs." I watched him disappear down the stairwell. "Doesn't do stairs? A phobia?" I stared at Monty. "Are you kidding? What the hell am I supposed to do with you? Carry you up and down 3 flights? Monty put his head down, his ears moving subtly, suggesting shame, but not all that much. I unlocked Aunt Polly's door and picked up the house phone. Seth was going to think I was a crazy person. "Seth, hey, it's Grace. Listen, I have a problem." "Go on." "Monty doesn't do stairs." There was a long pause. "Seriously, can you blame him?" "Monty doesn't do what?" I shifted the phone to my other hand. "He won't go down the stairs. Mr. Fishbein says it's a thing." "He won't go down the stairs?" Seth echoed. This was getting awkward. "That's right. He refuses, just sits there and whines." He started to laugh and continued for several minutes. Okay, maybe not minutes, but a long time. "So you've got an 80-pound dog that won't walk down the stairs but needs to be taken out 3 times a day?" I cleared my throat. 4 times. He was laughing again. When he finally stopped, he choked out, "I have got to put this in a book." "Yes, well, but in the meantime, any ideas?" "I can't carry him. Well, maybe down, but going up is going to be a real issue." "No worries, Grace. Give me a few minutes. We'll take him in the freight elevator." I hung up and looked down at Monty, who had his smiley face on. "Is the freight elevator going to work for you, or am I going to have to airlift you off the terrace?" Monty wagged his tail. It took a few minutes, but there was a knock at the door, and when I opened, Seth was standing there, still chuckling. "Show me." I sighed, tugged on the leash, and led Monty to the stairwell, where he once again sat down with quiet but resolute dignity and looked at me as if to say, "What? Again?" "See?" Seth shook his head. "Monty, you are a character. Follow me." We walked back, past the main broken elevator, turned a corner, another corner, and there was a large metal grate with a lock in the middle. Seth pulled out his keychain, found the right key, turned it, and pulled up the grate. It was indeed a freight elevator, stark and ugly, made for moving furniture, not people who paid thousands of dollars to have their powder rooms professionally decorated. Seth bowed and made a grand sweep with his arm. "After you." Monty and I moved to the center of the elevator, and we descended in silence. Seth opened the doors and looked at me. "How long will you be?" I shrugged. "Usually 15 minutes. He took a deep breath. Well, it's silly to just stand here and wait for you to come back. Mind if I walk along? What? Walk along? Now? After I had just spent half the night congratulating myself for not being at all interested in him in the first place? What if I said no? Would he slam the grate shut, forcing me to carry Monty up 3 flights of stairs? Sure, Monty and I would love the company. We walked down the narrow back hallway at a steel door that opened directly into the street. There are some spring days that are perfect. The sun is just the right amount of bright. The sky is perfect blue. The air smells like lilac and fresh mown grass. This was not one of those kinds of mornings. This was a gray, too much traffic, slightly cold, and garbagey smelling morning. Dogs don't care about things like that, though. Monty was always happy and grateful to be out, head high and tail wagging. Don't you wish your life was that simple, Seth said. Eat, sleep, and head outside a few times a day. I always said that, if I died young, I wanted to come back as one of Aunt Polly's dogs. They're always treated like kings. We were walking away from the green, toward a side street that I knew had patches of grass and trees. Morning traffic was stalled, of course, and impatient horns could be heard a block away on South Street. I needed to say something. Anything. All he knew of me was that I was Polly's niece, read Agatha Christie, and had, at best, limited conversational skills. I wasn't going to go into my usual bowing and scraping mode, but I at least had to show them that I was, in fact, capable of intelligent conversation. And maybe I could also be devastatingly charming, witty, flirtatious, captivating, and alluring, not to mention on the brink of finding a cure for cancer and the end of world hunger. Are you from Morristown? I asked. Wow, was that an original icebreaker or what? He shook his head. The Midwest, Kansas. I came out here after my divorce. New start and all. I lived in Brooklyn at first and wrote. When I finally started making enough money from my books to quit my day job, I realized I could barely afford in Bay Ridge anymore. I was really struggling there for a while. Luckily, this gig opened up. A writing buddy of mine is the manager's nephew, and he told me about Morristown, so I came to check it out. It's perfect for me. I have lots of time to write, and I don't have to worry about rent anymore. How about you? Are you a native? We stopped. Monty squatted. Really? How can I plant a perfect reply when I was taking the still warm doggy poop in a plastic bag? Monty was taking his time, so I gave the short answer. Born and raised here, moved around a bit, got married, divorced, and came back home. Almost, anyway. I live in Parsippany. Close enough. I nodded, then bent down to grab the poop. I'm sure I had the grace of a gazelle, bending, straightening, and then my signature knotting of the bag. We turned and started walking back. I read the first of your books last night, I said. He grinned. Really? You're not my usual demographic. I realized that as soon as I read the first page. Also, the illustrations were kind of a giveaway, but even though I was not 10 years old, I thought the story was pretty cool. Thanks. Now you'll have to let me read something of yours. But nothing of mine is published. He raised his eyebrows. Like you don't have every single thing you've written saved to Dropbox, Mozy, the hard drive, the flash drive, and a disk? I laughed. Oh yeah, that's right. I may have something somewhere. We were back on the elevator, going up. So when is our next outing? He asked. I'd come back at lunchtime for a quick once around the green. About 1. The freight elevator creaked to a stop and he opened the door. Call me from the house phone. I'll be waiting. Monty and I walked back to the condo. I slipped off the leash and grabbed my purse. Monty was sitting, his tail wagging gently. How did we do? I asked him. He cocked his head and grinned, and I locked the door behind me. I did not go running into Amanda's office, but as soon as we had a few minutes alone, I told her. Something happened. Her head jerked up. What? The elevator is out of order, and Monty has severe stair aversion syndrome. Seth had to take us in the freight elevator this morning, alone. Then he walked with us. She smacked the top of her desk with her open hand. Oh my God, that's perfect. And? I cleared my throat. We had a nice walk. Well, that's a start, Amanda. It was just a walk. And he seems nice, but he's still not for me. Nonsense. How long have you got? What do you mean? The elevator, how long will it be on the fritz? It's an unexpected repair, but should be cleared up by tonight. She frowned. Surely we can find a way to milk this for another day or two. What is the inside of the elevator like? Can we jam the buttons somehow? Amanda, I am not going to sabotage the elevator and inconvenience the entire building just so I can get into the freight elevator with Seth. Why not? I shook my head. She shrugged. Well, it's your choice, of course. I must say you're looking good. The highlights are really working, and I'm glad you didn't cut your hair. Maybe a spray tan? I turned and left her office. At lunchtime, it had begun to rain. Just one of those springtime drizzles, but Monty, to add to his list of many idiosyncrasies, loved the rain. He was a water dog after all, and to compensate for the utter lack of lakes to bound through in downtown Morristown, he instead splashed through every puddle, no matter how small. I opened the door to the happiest-looking golden retriever I've ever seen. I buzzed Seth, grabbed an umbrella, bent down in front of Monty and pleaded my case. Listen, I know you love weather like this, but please, my hair will frizz and my makeup will smudge, and if you shake your wet fur, I'll spend the rest of the day smelling like dog. Monty, I'm begging you. Short and sweet, okay? He totally ignored me. Seth had on a hat. Not a baseball cap, or a newsboy cap, or even one of those beanie things. He had a real hat, a tan fedora with a leather cord for a band and a wide brim, just like Indiana Jones. And it was a good thing, too, because by the time we walked outside, the rain had gone from drizzle to steady downpour. Really, Seth, stay here and wait. I don't want you to get all wet. He grinned and pulled up the corner of the collar of his jacket. Just give me a corner of your umbrella. I'll be fine. We started walking. Monty immediately dropped his nose to the ground and began sniffing furiously. What's he looking for? Seth asked. I'm never sure. Maybe because he's getting wet, he thinks there's a duck somewhere. Isn't that supposed to be his job? Retrieving ducks? Seth laughed. I never thought of that. He loves the rain. We could be out here all day. It's not so bad. He was not under the umbrella, and the rain spattered against his shoulders, turning the denim of his jacket dark blue. He was wearing work boots, dark brown and laced high, the kind that protected your feet not only from the weather, but napalm attacks. His hands were in the front pockets of his jeans, and a rivulet of water was falling down from the brim of his hat. Very Marlboro man. My shoes were getting wet. Why wasn't I wearing cute rain boots with pink daisies on them? I could feel all the hair on my head slowly frizzing up, and the dampness turned my carefully applied foundation into something resembling spackle. I was trying to hold the umbrella, Monty's leash, and 3 plastic garbage bags, just in case they were needed. My trendy, but not at all waterproof cotton jacket was soaked through. I was, I'm sure, a vision. We got to the corner and stood, waiting for the light to change. So, Grace, when can I read something? I started to chew my lip, realized I had no lip gloss with me to make a repair, and stopped. Well, I've actually been thinking about that. I've got a few short sci-fi pieces that I really like. How do you feel about futuristic fantasy? As long as it's not an end-of-the-world thing. No, I tried that, but it was too depressing to write about. This is your basic space station in an unnamed galaxy. Sounds perfect. It's hardly perfect, but I like it. It was going to be a series of novellas, different characters in the same world, you know? I got sidetracked when I got divorced and I put them aside, but I've been doing a few rewrites and I glanced up at them. Do you really want to hear this? Are you kidding? I love the idea of actually talking shop with someone. Writing is very lonely, you know that. Monty, by this time, had stopped to pee 3 times. Enough was enough. Every time I took a step, I could hear the water in my shoes gently swish. I jerked on his leash and turned around. You're right, it is lonely. I was in a critique group for a while, but I shrugged. It was kind of a love fest, everyone gushing about how wonderful everyone's work was. Well, if it was all that wonderful, why wasn't it published? Or why didn't those people self-publish? He nodded. You have to be brave to put your work out there. It's not just about the work being good or bad. It's about having the confidence and belief in yourself to go after what you want. I nodded. You're right. Which is why everything I've written is still on my hard drive. I'm not brave. We crossed South Street and walked back to the building. We were silent all the way up. Seth opened the grate and Monty and I stepped out. What time tonight? He asked. 6-ish? It's a much longer walk, usually 20 minutes or so. So in this weather, are you sure? He nodded. Thank you, I said. He closed the elevator door. Monty and I walked back to Aunt Polly's. I dried him off with a towel, changed my shoes, found a real raincoat, and took a long, hard look in the mirror before I left. You need to be brave, Grace, I said aloud. My reflection looked pale and uncertain. Brave, I said loudly, then went back to work. I texted Aunt Polly. I need to be brave. Yes, you do. What makes you brave? Courage. Isn't that the same thing? She took a much longer time to reply. Being brave is an action. It's something you do at a particular time and place. Courage is the thing in your soul that allows you to get up every morning and face the world, even when you're not feeling brave at all. Did you just make that up? No. Fortune cookie. It stopped raining by the time I left work, but it was cold, gray, and damp. When I got home, I put on a warm, oversized fleece pullover, tied my hair up in a messy bun, printed out the first of my sci-fi novellas. Then I called Seth and met him at the freight elevator. Here, I said, handing him my blood, sweat, tears, hopes, and dreams. I'm being brave, he grinned. Excellent. We took the elevator down and started walking around the green, down South Street toward the library, on a few back streets, then back up to the center of town. Monty stopped about every 6 minutes and slogged through every puddle and overflowing pothole he could find. He pooped twice. He tried to make friends with a cavapoo who wanted nothing to do with him. He sniffed everything. Seth and I talked about writing. My first effort, he told me, was a Civil War novel, following the epic journey of a sensitive teenage Connecticut boy who left his apprenticeship as a blacksmith and went off to fight in Virginia. I loved history but didn't realize that until my third rewrite that my protagonist spoke like a 20th century skateboarder. When it was finally pointed out to me, I deleted the whole project and swore off writers' groups forever. How old were you? High school. I had an English teacher who told me I could make a living as a writer, and I was naive enough to believe him. How about you? I started much earlier. My first effort was a Nancy Drew ripoff about a smart and sassy blonde who solved crime with her 3 collie dogs and a black stallion. I had lots of animal-related literary influences as a child. Are you hungry? He asked. We could take out. Committed pig? My weakness, just mention red meat and all willpower, fell away. Yes, sure. We didn't get takeout after all. We sat under the awning on the only dry table and ate burgers and fries, and Seth even had a milkshake. Monty had a burger all to himself, and when we were done, we started walking again, around the green, then up to the courthouse, back down and around again. We passed a line of bars and restaurants on South Street, all with wet and empty chairs creeping out into the sidewalk, just as it started raining again. "Too bad it's crappy out," I said. "We could have a drink." "We can still have a drink," Seth said. "Come on." We went back to the building, but instead of walking back to the freight elevator, he led me down a short hallway that bore the sign, Manager. He unlocked the door. "Come on in. I have some wine somewhere." I hesitated, and he grinned. "Seriously? You can trust me, Grace. And if I try anything, Monty will protect you." "Monty is so in love with you, you could stab me with a kitchen knife and skin me alive, and he'd just wag his tail." But I followed him in, past the front office, which was terribly neat and appeared to be perfectly organized. There was a living room with a comfortable, messy, and very masculine vibe. The walls were a rich dark brown, the furniture leather with gold and red pillows. There were large, colorful paintings on the wall, very abstract, and lots of candles around that looked like they were burned on a regular basis, rather than used for show. "Sit. I have red, white, or beer." He disappeared behind a swinging door. I walked to the floor and ceiling bookcase that covered one wall. "White, please." There were 2 rows of his books, with different covers and foreign translation. Lots of fiction, science fiction, and history. A couple of shelves of biography, political and literary figures mostly, and a bottom shelf packed with trade paperbacks of what could be politely called erotica, by an author called Brooklyn Lynch. I was crouching down looking at some of the more unusual titles when he returned with 2 glasses of wine. "Ah, you've discovered my secret," he said, handing me a glass. I stood up and sipped. The wine was light and delicious. "What secret?" "You read that sexy stuff?" "Actually, I write that sexy stuff." Luckily, I had swallowed, or I probably would have spewed wine all over him. "You're Brooklyn Lynch?" He grinned sheepishly. "Well, writing kids' books is not necessarily a big-time moneymaker." I sat down in a deep, comfortable chair, resisting the urge to sink back, and instead perched on the edge of the seat. Monty curled at my feet contentedly. "So you write funny, heart-wrenching tales of self-discovery and what? Soft porn?" "You would be surprised how hard it is to write good porn." "No, actually, I do know how hard it is. I tried to write a romance one, and the sex scenes nearly did me in. Writing sex for the first time is like having it for the first time. What to say? Who gets undressed first? Where do you put your hands? What if there's a condom? It nearly killed me." He laughed. "Absolutely. It gets easier, but—" He was sitting on the couch and he shifted a bit, then pulled a sheaf of papers out of his back pocket. My story. "Do you mind? Can I read part of this now?" Good Lord, I felt a sudden rise in my throat, sour and sick. He wanted to read that now? All that ease and confidence was gone, and I almost couldn't breathe. "Never mind," he said quickly. "I'll read it later." Was I that transparent? This called for an immediate reversal. "No, it's okay. Read it if you want. I'll just sit here and quake in absolute terror that you won't like it." He looked at me steadily. "Do you like it?" I nodded. He smiled gently. "Well then, that's what counts, right?" I nodded again. "If you like," he said, "you could read a bit of Brooklyn." He reached down and around and snagged a book off the bottom shelf and handed it to me. The cover was stunning. A single black rose and a pair of handcuffs on a pearly gray background. Graceful red script formed the title, Bound by Love. I took a breath and opened the book to a random page. A random page describing a scene between an obviously well-endowed gentleman and his ex-wife, who apparently had a weakness for all the variety a 4-poster bed could provide. I read about 4 paragraphs and found myself blushing furiously. Not that I was embarrassed exactly to be reading such an explicit scene, but it was so good, detailed, very explicit, and surprisingly tender. I glanced up at Seth. He was reading intently, his eyes moving quickly across my pathetic pages. I skipped ahead a few chapters. Now, Well Endowed was having a conversation with his personal assistant, who was obviously very young and totally in love with him, about the perils of sexual obsession. It was a great conversation. The dialogue was sharp and funny without being too smarky, and I could tell that Mr. Hung Like a Horse knew all about his naive young woman's feelings for him and was trying desperately to talk her down. Of course, by the next page, he'd failed and they were doing things on his desk that probably would have led to a massive lawsuit, not to mention several strained muscles in the real world, but seemed totally plausible on the page. At least I wasn't blushing anymore, and I really wanted to read what came next. I was through with the personal assistant and halfway into his challenging relationship with his stepfather's young niece when my concentration was broken. Seth had cleared his throat. I looked up and he was leaning forward in his chair, grinning. "Well?" I asked. "This is so cool, Grace. Really. I don't think I've ever read anything quite like it. Your world building is spot on. I'm not done yet, but can I keep this? And can I read the next one?" Uh, sure. Yes, I'll print it out. Or give me your email and I can just send it to you." He stood up and I realized it was late. I glanced at my watch. I'd been there over an hour. I jumped up. "Oh, Seth, I didn't mean to camp out here like this." I looked down at the book and then up at him. "Can I take this with me and finish it?" He laughed and nodded. "Sure, but isn't it almost time for Monty's final walk?" He was right. I tucked his book inside the waistband of my jeans and pulled the fleece over it. We went down the back hallway and outside. The rain had stopped. The air was clear and smelled of spring. The streets were quiet and shiny. Monty managed to go through 7 different puddles and peed 5 times before we turned back to the apartment building. "So I guess the main elevator is fixed by now?" I asked. A funny look passed over his face. "I hadn't thought about it. Usually they leave a message that the work was done. I'll have to check when I get back in the office." "Well, thanks so much for helping me out here with Monty. I'll be sure to tell Aunt Polly." He tilted his head. "You make it sound like you're never going to see me again. You keep forgetting my birthday drink and cupcake." "Right, of course." We went in through the back door, through to the freight elevator, and up to the apartment. "Okay then, I'll talk to you tomorrow," he said as I got out. He nodded and shut the gate. I walked back to the apartment. The out-of-order sign was still posted. By tomorrow morning, it would be gone, and Monty and I would be back to walking alone. I let myself into the apartment.